All right. Are we being visited by space aliens? All right. So for that to happen, number one, there has to be life elsewhere in the universe. So is it possible that there's life elsewhere in the universe? Odds are kind of favorable. The next one is it possible to actually travel these large distances within the lifespans of these creatures? I mean, if there's an Earth-like planet, having Earth-like light, let's pretend, located 800 light years away, if the light speed, how long would it take for them to be able to come here? So the assumption is it would take forever, right? So would they be able to actually survive the trip? So that was always the biggest concern. So, but the question is, if there's a civilization out there who's been playing this game without technology for millions of years, they may be able to take shortcuts through the space-time continuum, and they may be able to do content. All right. So the question is, are we being visited? So is there any evidence of being visited by space like UFOs or whatnot?
I have some strange objects here found in Precambrian times, dated about 800.
Can you guys hear any of this?
No.
No.
I think he
I was
muted,
just wondering.
I think he muted his mic and muted his audio. So Evan's just
Oh, there it goes.
we can't hear anything, Mr. I can't see your last name, Mr. C.
Your mic is muted.
You're so muted.
All right. If you cannot hear anything, just let me know.
You couldn't.
Don't wait for 10 minutes.
No.
All right. You guys are doing better than the other class.
Possible.
If you can't see anything or hear anything, sometimes it's tough to tell which screen I'm supposed to.
Ancient cultures experienced real flight hundreds of years ago. I have some strange object here, found in pre-Columbian tombs, dated about 800 to 600 before Christ. Archaeologists believe that these must be insects. Perhaps a part of a pre-Inca cult which revered insects. But when closely examined, these figures don't look like insects at all. Insects have their wings on the top of their bodies. Here, the wings are on the bottom. So what are these strange figures if they are not insects?
They look like airplanes. The amulets look like airplanes.
Bob Trelease is an expert in the study of early flight.
They have the shape, the physical structure. They have the elements that make an airplane as we recognize it today.
These ancient figures reminded Bob Trelease of a very specific plane.
When I saw the amulet, I immediately associated with the shape of the F-4D. The shape matched it.
The apparent resemblance between the modern combat jet and the ancient icon is striking. But could it just be a coincidence? When Bob Trelease noticed something else peculiar about the golden figures, he began to wonder what the reality was behind this mystery.
The cone look like they could be a engineering representation of turbulent air over the leading edge of the wing.
Were our ancestors experimenting with real flights, or perhaps were they expressing some kind of mythology? Could it be both? One possible answer comes from anthropological discoveries made in the 20th century.
When one culture with a simple technology comes into contact with a second culture with a more complex technology, people often turn to religion.
Anthropologist Dr. Lamont Lindstrom offers one explanation for the existence of these figurines. It may be found in the anthropological concept known as cargo cult.
The cargo cult is a South-Pacific example of a kind of religious movement that's happened almost every place in the world.
Life in the South Pacific prior to World War II was pre-industrial in its simplicity. There was no electricity. There were no roads and no radio. No contact with the outside world. Overnight, World War II brought amazing treasures from distant worlds to these remote islands. Airplanes descended from the sky and opened their doors. Out flowed a deluge of military equipment and technology, which the islanders had never seen before. To them, the radio was a wonder, a magical machine able to speak in many voices.
So people who lived a very simple life for generations over a very short period of time experienced an incredible amount of the new technology that just poured across the shore and came into their lives.
And then when the war ended, the cargo suddenly disappeared. Desperate to find some way to bring the cargo back, the islanders turned to prayer and religious ritual.
Much of the ritual cargo cult attempts to try to attract the return of whoever controls the cargo. They do things like, in many islands, cut airstrips in the forest, in the jungles, hoping that the planes will land again. They build model planes, sometimes use their small models, sometimes almost life-size models, and put these planes on the airfield as a kind of imitation, some device that will encourage the cargo planes to land.
Using the cargo cult theory, were these gold artifacts created by ancient Indians, modeled after mysterious aircraft from long ago? One way to examine this mystery was to see if the amulets were aerodynamically sound and might have been able to fly. Captain Peter Belding, a pilot and air traffic controller, built exact-scale models of these icons out of molded plastic. Although it is unknown whether the amulets might represent powered aircraft or gliders, Captain Belding made them self-propelling. He attached a small prop motor to one, and in the other, he placed a turboprop engine. Now Captain Belding tests the more powerful turboprop model. The sight of these models in the sky raises intriguing questions about the icons on which they are based. The idea that they were copied from a working airplane in existence 800 years before the birth of Christ is very difficult to believe.
All right, I have to. Can you guys see it now? Yeah, you can't see it right now.
Is it possible?
They built model planes.
It is unknown whether...
Airplanes took about
One way to examine this mystery was to see if the amulets were aerodynamically sound and might have been able to fly. Captain Peter Belding, a pilot and air traffic controller,
the amulets are designed based upon real flight characteristics of an airplane as opposed to an insect. They should be able to fly, and as you guys saw, they did fly. All right, so the question is, are these based upon real airplanes? Yeah, let's get back to the show. All right.
cargo cult theory.
So what does it even mean? Just pretend that you can trace these amulets back to the pre-Inca, and then, and knowing that these amulets have the true flight characteristics of a modern airplane, what does it mean about pre-Inca at the time? What do you guys think? What's your hypothesis on that? Did they have airplanes back then? Is that what it is?
Probably that they were visited or something.
Or can you make that argument that, hey, I mean, we've seen the anthropological explanation that they came up with. The idea is pre-Inca is not supposed to be technologically advanced. So is it possible that they were actually imitating some advanced space alien civilization in their technology? Is that what it is? I think that's the conclusion that they were forcing here, right? All right, so let's just analyze that. Would this be the proof that their argument, if their argument is correct, that they were being visited by an advanced alien civilization, yes or no? All right, so some of you guys will say yes to that. This is Ancient Aliens, I think, from the History Channel. And this is the sort of history that they do most of the time, so that's kind of cute. You believe in this sort of stuff. All right, so some of you guys will look at this and then say, okay, this is good enough evidence for you to go, wow, geez, I think this is the proof that we're being visited forever. All right, what's the argument against this?
They could have just been, they could have came up with this on their own and just made not by seeing it, but they just could have made it on their own. They could have been creative.
All right, these are just possibly our projects, right?
Or bugs or something.
Or okay, so the bugs argument, they say, okay, these are not bugs. Like, okay, I'm gonna go along with that. You can argue that these are based on bugs, or you can argue that, hey, they just came up with it on their own without even thinking about it, so it's coincidental. You can make every single argument. If you don't believe in it, obviously you're not going to believe in it. Or you can argue that, hey, maybe they're fakes. How can you actually trace this back to 800 years before Christ? These are gold amulets. They cannot be carbon dated. All right, so if you're not a believer, you're not going to believe in it. If you're a believer, you're going to believe in just about everything. So you notice that you can argue either way. I think the best argument that I've seen is evident they had fish back then in the rivers that they had that kind of look like this. All right, the fish is also going to have the proper flight characteristics. So notice that the arguments can go either way. All right, so we don't decide things based upon arguments in science. We look at the hypothesis and check to see what the predictions are, and that's what we test. Or else people would be arguing for it. All right, so you can say this is evidence, and you can say, no, this is not, this is just fake, either way. All right, so here's the biggest problem, guys. The physicists, or us as physicists, had distances that need to be traveled. These are enormous distances, all right? And then you need to be traveling very near the light speed for you to be able to actually travel these distances within your own lifetime. So how do you accelerate in space? Where does the external force come from? Where do we get this?
Space begins at the edge of the Earth's atmosphere.
In space, you need to be able to accelerate, which means that you have to get up to speed. You have to be moving near the light speed at some point for this to work out. Which means that there has to be an external force acting and something has to push you in space. So where do we get the external force from in space?
Space begins at the edge of the Earth's atmosphere, 50 miles straight up. But the shuttle orbits at an altitude of about 180 miles. How does it get up there? Space travel is all based upon Isaac Newton's third law of motion. This fundamental principle of rocket motion is 300 years old, and we've enlisted rocket scientist Wayne Lee to explain it.
Believe it or not, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand how a rocket works. This balloon here is essentially a rocket that's powered by compressed air. What happens is that when the air rushes out, it propels the balloon forward up the string. This is exactly Newton's third law at work. When the balloon throws the air overboard, the opposite reaction propels the balloon up the string.
Wayne Lee put on ice skates for the first time in 15 years, all in the name of science.
Newton's third law says that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So simply stated, that says that I cannot push on something without that something pushing back on me with equal strength. And so as in this example here shows you how rockets work. You can imagine that I'm the rocket, and my partner here is a rocket fuel. I am pushing off on the rocket fuel, and that propels me in the other direction.
All right, so how do we accelerate in space? Use the Newton's third law, action and reaction law. Action force is going to act on the rocket fuel, and the reaction force is going to act back on the rocket. That's how we get around. Except the problem with this technology is you cannot go faster than 25,000 miles per hour. All right, at 25,000 miles per hour, we're not going anywhere. The nearest Earth-like planets are light years away. All right, so there's no way we can get to any of these planets within our lifetime. It's out of the question.